Hello everyone. Today I will show you the hardest rook and pawn versus rook checkmate. In the following position, white has an extra pawn, and black's king is far from the queen side. However, winning this position is very difficult because the pawn is only on the second rank. The only move that wins for white in this position is rook to d5, cutting off black's king along the 5th rank. Black does the same thing with rook to f2. If black plays king to f4 instead, white will play king c2, and with the help of the rook, white will be able to advance the pawn and get a winning position. Now comes the second key move. White must play king to c1 to protect the pawn while keeping the pawn on the second rank so the king won't be cut off with the pawn. After king to f4, the third key move for white is to play rook to d2, an interference on the second rank against the black rook. However, the point of rook d2 is actually to cut off black's king 3 files away from white's pawn with rook to e1. But the game is not over yet. After rook to h2, the only move for white to win is to play rook to e8, preventing black's rook from reaching the 8th rank and gaining checking distance. Before white advances his pawn, white must get his king to d4 and push the enemy king back by one more file before retreating his king black to behind the pawn. Now comes one of the hardest moves to foresee. Rook to f2 instead draws the game after black plays rook to h8. The move to win is rook to f1, and only after rook to h8 does white play rook to f2. After king to c1, black has to play king to g5 as rook to c8 check allows white to play rook to c2. Eventually, in the following position, white must play king to a5 to threaten b4, which forces the black rook to keep checking. White then plays king to a6, and black plays rook back to b8. It seems that white has made no progress, but now comes rook to c2, intending an interference with the black rook on the b file by checking black's king on c5. Now the point of rook to f1 then f2 becomes clear. By losing a move, white was able to get black's king to g5. If the black king is on g4, black will play king to f3. And after rook to c3 king to e2 pawn to b3, black can win the pawn with king to d2 rook to h3 and king to c2. Now, if black plays king to f4, white can simply do the same thing except that white can get his pawn to b4 and b5 where white's king will protect it. With the pawn finally advanced and the white rook blocking all the checks, the rest is a simple conversion to the Lucena position. All white needs to do is to keep the black king away from the pawn and his pawn protected, and when the pawn gets to the 7th rank, a transfer of the rook to the 4th rank. After winning the rook with the bridge method, white can easily win the game by checkmating the enemy king with the king and the rook. Thank you all for 850 subscribers, and I will see you all in my next video. Goodbye.